Alright, so now we can set up our laser paddle, which is going to be a little bit complicated, but here's what we'll need. First, I've got a sprite paddle laser, which is 96 by 24. The origin point is centered. Basically the same dimensions as the normal sprite paddle, just a different color. Then in the power-ups, I have a sprite laser, and this is a width of 8, height 24, and the origin point is set at an x of 4, but a y of 24. That means that instead of the middle, the origin point is actually going to be centered along the bottom edge. Remember way back in one of the early episodes when I talked about how the coordinate system works. And the 0, 0 is up in the top left corner, and positive numbers on the y-axis go down. So since we have a height of 24 pixels and we are setting the origin point on pixel 24, then our y-coordinate will be set towards the bottom. And then we've got objects created from both of those. I've got the object paddle laser, which is visible and should also be set to solid, and its parent should be the object paddle. This will allow our paddle laser to inherit all the movement events and actions from the paddle, so we don't have to duplicate them here. Click OK, and then we've got in our power-ups the object laser, which is visible and set to a depth of -50. This will essentially make it drawn above all other objects, but below the power-up, which is at a depth of -100. So click OK. And this is going to be a pretty destructive power-up. The lasers themselves will destroy bricks, so we're giving the player the ability to specifically target and destroy bricks, which means we don't want them to be able to do this forever, and we don't want them to be able to just continuously shoot. So let's open up our object paddle laser, and we'll begin adding some limitations. First of all, let's add an event, create, and let's set up a timer so that we can only use the paddle laser for a certain amount of time. Let's come over to main 2, select our set alarm. We'll set the number of steps to 300, which will be about 10 seconds. This may be too long, but we can always change it later on. So click OK, and then we need to set event alarm 0, and then in the main 1 event, come to our objects, change instance, change the self into the paddle, object paddle, perform events. So after about 10 seconds, our laser paddle will turn back into the normal paddle. Next, let's address the issue of the player just being able to hold down the fire key and shoot a bunch of lasers. Let's come back to create and come over to our control. We are going to come and set a new variable. That variable will be called is_firing. Give it a value of false, because when the paddle is created, we are not yet firing. Click OK, and let's set up the firing mechanism. So let's go to Add Event, Keyboard, and to keep things simple, let's make the up key the firing key. And so we're only going to allow the player to shoot lasers if they're not already firing. But we'll also set up a timer so that every so often, every fraction of a second, that will reset. So basically, rather than a continuous stream of laser fire, it will only allow the player to shoot every now and then. So first we need to come and test variable, and we are going to test isFiring equal to false. Then we bring in some blocks. We'll come over to main 1 and drag in a create instance. What we want to create is one of our lasers, so our object laser. And the first one, we'll have 2 of them shoot off. The first one will be at an x of -28, y of 0, and set to relative. Click OK, and we can bring in another one underneath that. Select our object laser, and this time we will give it an x of +28, y of 0, and relative. If you saw the sprite when I opened up paddle laser image, there were 2 little divots implying that they were guns, and so the -28 and +28 will line up the objects with those little divots, and so it'll make it look like it's actually shooting. Now that's really only relevant to the sprite that I created, so it might not match up perfectly with yours. You'll just have to adjust the position and get it to look right. But now that we are actually shooting lasers, we need to come back to control and set our variable is firing to true. Click OK. And now because we have is firing set to true, this condition will not trigger, and so we will not be able to shoot any more lasers. We want to be able to shoot more than 2, however, because we have our laser paddle set up for 10 seconds. So we'll create another timer that resets our variable. So let's go to main 1, main 2, and set alarm. Drag that underneath. And let's give it, say 10 steps, so 1/3 of a second. And we want to give this to a new alarm, alarm 1. Hit OK. And then we need to create that alarm, so add event alarm, alarm 1, come over to control, set variable is firing, and when this triggers it will set it back to false. Click OK. Now this 10 steps might be too quick, so we can always increase this number. But we should be able to fire our lasers, so let's go ahead and open up the object lasers. And when these are created, we want them to move away from the paddle, so add event, create. Let's come over to move, move fixed. We will set the direction up at a speed of 8. If you want faster lasers, you can change that. Click OK. And then we need to make the laser actually destroy something, so add event, collision, brick 1, because again that will affect all of the child bricks. And then we come over to main 1, this destroy instance. First we want it to destroy other, which will be that object brick 1. And then we want to bring in another one underneath it that applies to self. Remember, the order here is important. We want to destroy the brick before we destroy the laser, otherwise we'll have an action that GameMaker will not have an object attached to. So we can close this now. Close this one, and then finally we need to open up our object power-up, come to our object paddle collision, and way down here at the bottom, we can now add our final test variable. You can leave this else destroy, even though this will be the final possibility. If we leave this else in here, just in case, for whatever reason, our decision variable ever comes back with something that we haven't accounted for, it'll still just destroy the power-up. So this is kind of a safeguard. So let's come over to control, test variable, drag that above the else. We're testing for the variable decision equal to 4. Click OK. Drag in some blocks underneath it. Make sure it's in the right order. And we now need to change our paddle into the laser paddle. So come back to main 1. Select this change instance and drag it into the blocks. We are going to select other so that it applies to the paddle, which is the other object in this collision. Change that into our object paddle laser. Perform events. And then finally we need to destroy the power-up, so destroy instance, drag that underneath. Applied to self, OK. And just to make sure that we will get a laser power-up to test this, I'm going to come back to the create event, come back to the decision, and instead of choosing random, I'm going to select 4. You don't have to do this, but by setting it to 4, I will make sure that we get the laser power up. Okay, so let's test. And set this off. First one I get should be a laser. Turns my paddle to a laser, I hit up, and you can see I can shoot. But I can't shoot in a continuous stream. It's spaced out because of that timer, and after 10 seconds it turns back into a normal paddle. We do have a little bit of a problem here, though. The room is clear, but I haven't won yet. Reason for that is because we have the ball keeping track of whether there's still a brick in the room or not. And since the last brick was destroyed by my laser, instead of the ball, it didn't account for that. That's a quick fix, though. Just close our power-up window and reopen up the object ball and find that collision with object brick 1, and all the way down here we have this: if the number of instances of object brick 1 are equal to 0, then go to the next room. Well, we can select these two, copy them, open up our object laser, and in the collision with object brick 1, if we paste in between the two instances, we now have it so that the laser will destroy the other object, being the brick. It will then check to see if there are no more bricks in the room. If there aren't, then it will go to the next room. But if there are, then this next room will not trigger. Remember, condition deals with the action directly beneath it. And so if this next room gets bypassed, it will then go and destroy the laser. And essentially, gameplay will continue. We can close these. Give it a final test. Okay. And try and destroy all the bricks with my laser before the ball does. Okay, so we see that we now can win by destroying all the bricks with the laser. It is pretty overpowered though, so we may want to make it last only 5 seconds, or make the intervals between when we can shoot a little bit longer. Definitely want to go back in and make sure that I reset my object power-up create event set variable back to the choose 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you changed it as well, make sure you change it back. So now our game has a lot of power-ups in it that make it a little bit more interesting than regular old Breakout. As we saw, it can also make the game really easy. To add some challenge back into it, we can put in some obstacles. We can make bricks that don't get destroyed, or bricks that take a couple hits before they're destroyed. In the next video, we'll look at adding some of those into our game.